Excited to have our final guest. What's next for the federal workforce, trade policy, the economy? We have White House National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Kevin. All right, let's dive right in. The government shutdown, the topic of the day. Where do we stand from the White House's point of view, and are there off-ramps ahead for ending this thing?
Well, yeah, first of all, the economic harm is real now. It's a couple weeks in. The CEA estimated that it would cost about 0.1% of GDP a week for a shutdown. And the way to think about the economic cost, oh, hey, Bob. The way to think about the economic cost is that if we want to export something, then the Commerce Department has to give you like an export license. And so the export licenses are being held up in some cases and so on. And so the costs are real, and the president and Republicans are adamant that we just get the government open. People forget sometimes, one of the things when we call it the Schumer shutdown, that there were 13 CRs that were clean when President Biden was in office. But what people forget is that meant that Republicans played along each time. They had about 80 votes on average for those things. And so I think the traditional Senate morality is that it's your job to be a moderating influence in Washington. And these even moderate senators are, I think, not fulfilling that duty. And the question then is why. I was at an event yesterday at the White House at the Rose Garden honoring Charlie Kirk. There are a number of senators there. And I was just asking people around the edges, why is it that the Democrats are holding, moderate Democrats, I've got lots of friends. I've been in town for almost 30 years, both sides of the aisle that I have high regard for. And I heard 2 or 3 different times from people, but these were Republicans telling me, so I don't know if it's the way Democrats are thinking, and I'd love to know what you think about this, that there's a No Kings protest coming on the 18th, and that the moderate Democrats are worried that if they open the government before then they'll run into all sorts of political risk of being primaried and so on. I don't know if it's true, but if it is true, then it means that maybe on the 19th we can get this thing open, as we should have all along.
Do you see, so for example, Congressman mentioned November 1, the Affordable Care Act insurance marketplace is open. Is that a hard deadline? Are there any kind of clear deadlines coming up?
I think that the president has a strong position that they need to open up the government, agree to open it up as we have, every day practically passed a bill to do so, and then let's go back to normal order and start negotiating things along the way. But to negotiate things under duress with a government shutdown is something that is not acceptable to the president at all. He's not going to budge. And I can tell you that I've been in the White House, as you know. We've also known each other a long time. Since 2017, I was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, and I came back. And this is the 3rd time the Democrats have basically shut down the Congress while President Trump has been there. And so it's almost like there's a political strategy that's the equivalent of trying to freeze the place kicker or something, where since President Trump has knocked so many balls out of the park and had so many wins, that they're trying to slow his momentum by just shutting down the government. And I certainly hope that's not true.
So we've heard even some Republicans show some openness to extending at least some of the Obamacare health insurance subsidies that are the crux of this debate. What is President Trump open to negotiating on the?
I think that President Trump is open to negotiating once the government's open.
Gotcha.
I think that's his position.
All right, let's talk about the economy. We're seeing robust GDP growth. A lot of that's due to AI and data center investment. Job growth looks a good bit weaker. Do you worry that this GDP surge is not something that's really benefiting American workers?
It's a thing that is a puzzle, that we've got really high productivity growth. We've got GDP growth for a couple quarters in a row in the sort of 3 to 4% range. And normally when that happens, then you see strong job growth. Now, one of the things that is the reason why it's puzzling is that over the last few years, there's 2 ways that we estimate jobs. There's a household survey where we call everybody up and say, hey, do you have a job? And then there's a payroll survey where we call up a firm and say, how many people did you hire? And the gap between the household survey and the payroll survey was about a couple million people cumulative to last year over the last couple years. And then we got this big revision where the payroll survey numbers went down, and it turns out the household survey was right. The reason I mentioned that is that the last number we have until the government opens, it'll be the last one we get to look at. The payroll survey number was weak, but the household survey number was 288,000. And since everything for the payroll survey revised towards the household survey, that it could be that we need to start to think that the household survey is the right answer. And one benefit of doing that right precisely at this moment is we have all this really strong data except for the jobs data. And if you believe the household survey is correct, then everything kind of makes a lot more sense. And so that's what I'm leaning towards, the way I think about it.
I mean, do you think immigration policy is affecting labor supply, and that's part of the story on payrolls?
There's a big decline in non-native born workers that's been more than offset by an increase in native born workers.
So one worry we're hearing more and more out there is that even if you do believe AI has huge transformative potential, we could be in a situation where there's an investment bubble, that there are risks of that popping, kind of like 2001. Are you worried about that? How would the Trump administration deal with any kind of correction in asset markets?
Well, I mean, we've got a lot of people that have been through the ups and downs of all sorts of things. I was in the White House when we had a minus 32% quarter because of COVID. And I think the fact that the president has assembled a seasoned team of competent people like Secretary Bassett, Secretary Lutnick, means that if things start to, inevitably in every economy, there's a moment where people are at the very least nervous. When things are challenging, I think that we've got a team the president's assembled that'll be up to that challenge. With respect to the AI, I think that there's a horse race going on right now. Where everybody thinks that they're going to reach the point where they're the one and they capture the whole market. And I think that horse race has been super productive. You see how quickly the tools are improving. And there are a number of academic studies that are showing that the AI improvement is spreading across industries. It is really a strong explanation for why productivity growth is so high. My belief is that you don't have to think about something popping or don't have to think it's a high probability, because the productivity gains are so high across the board that means that each one of the AIs that people are using is providing a lot of value add. And I think that if you have the third best AI, it could still help you run your shoe store or something. And so that the sort of calamity that might occur if somebody were to all of a sudden jump to the top is something to worry about. But I think that the value, put it this way, you can remember when the computer came out, we had my old friend Bob Gordon saying that it's like everywhere but in the statistics and so on. Well, the thing about AI is it's in the statistics already. There's a really famous economist from the Federal Reserve named Steve Olner, who with his colleague Dan Sickle once wrote a history of productivity booms in the US. And they found that the productivity booms were never observed by policymakers in real time and were only evident upon benchmark revision. Because productivity is so hard for data people to estimate. And so think about it, with AI, it's a productivity boom that we're already measuring. So you can imagine how good it'll be in the benchmark revision.
So let's connect this to monetary policy. You mentioned the Federal Reserve. You've said that interest rates should be cut. Looks like that's what they're probably going to do a couple more times this year.
Jay said that yesterday, that's right.
That said, inflation is still elevated, still above the target. Shouldn't they be focused on inflation right now rather than trying to stimulate the job market?
Well, I mean, the GDP deflator for the latest release was 2.1. I think that exactly which measure is the best measure is something that people debate, like is it PCE, PCE core, core services. I think you should just look at all of the numbers, and I actually like the GDP deflator as a kind of summary of what's going on. And it's about 2. Inflation has really been cut in half since January, and so the trajectory is good. And if you have an understanding of how economies work, and you understand that because of AI, we're in the midst of a huge positive supply shock, that you remember what happens if you shift the supply curve out, you go down the demand curve and prices go down. And so it's actually quite a deflationary thing. And there was precedent for this. I worked at the Federal Reserve in the 90s with Alan Greenspan, and you might recall that there was a time when the computer revolution was starting to happen. Equity markets were celebrating. The unemployment rate was really, really low, and my friend Bob Gordon was saying, but the productivity is not in the data, and so the Phillips curve team at the Fed were advising Greenspan that with low unemployment, to stay ahead of inflation, they need to lift interest rates quite a bit because the unemployment rate was so low. But Greenspan decided that if you're getting a positive supply shock, then you can let low unemployment stay without having to lift rates. And he gave us 3 or 4 really great boom years because he had that sound judgment. And I think that the Fed has an opportunity like that right now.
So you were supposedly a candidate to be the next chairman of the Fed. I understand Treasury Secretary Bessent has been interviewing you and others for the job. What can you tell us about that selection process? What's President Trump looking for in this appointment?
I could just say that I think that President Trump wants to have a thorough process. He wants to, he trusts Secretary Bessent, as he should, who's been in the middle of markets for a good long time, to think through what's the really next best path for monetary policy. I think that there are a lot of candidates that I think could do a good job, and I think Secretary Bessent has written a great missive about what the next phase of monetary policy should look like. If you're wondering what kind of things that.
So I want to ask about that. Yeah, Secretary Bessent, he's very critical of how the Fed has operated over the last 10, 20 years, suggesting kind of deeper reforms are needed. How much of that do you agree with? Do you think this is an institution that needs major overhaul?
Yeah, I do. I think that the Fed needs to be more transparent. We need to know not just dots, but why they think what they think. And when they make a mistake, as they did with inflation, they should have economists explain to us what they got wrong and how they're changing their models so that maybe next time it doesn't happen. I think that being the Wizard of Oz behind a curtain used to work. Way back in the day, you might recall the Fed didn't even say what the policy was. You had to just learn it from watching markets. Yeah. And I think that transparency has moved in the right direction, but it's still got a good long ways to go.
So Fed Governor Myron has been arguing that the neutral rate of interest is significantly lower than most of his colleagues believe, that is a reason to cut rates a lot right now. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that assessment of the neutral rate?
I have high regard for Steve, and I respect his argument, but I'm not going to go into specific rates right now.
Gotcha. So we've seen some fascinating back and forth on China in the last several days. Give us an update. Are we seeing a re-escalation of the U.S.-China trade war that had seemed dormant for a while, or what comes next?
President Xi and President Trump have a strong relationship. There are a lot of us that have strong relationships with our counterparts in the Chinese government. And to be honest, we were pretty surprised when all of a sudden, out of the blue, they really ramped up pressure with this rare earth thing. It sounds like a minor thing, but it can be a big disruption to the economy if they really went ahead. And my judgment is that the imports from China to the U.S. have gone down a lot, but China's economy, which is kind of teetering on the edge of recession, I think, has been able to withstand the pressure from our trade policy by selling a lot of stuff to Europe. And I think that they recognize that since they're funding the Ukraine war and doing other things that we disagree with, that there's a chance that Europe is going to maybe start to have a parallel policy to us. In other words, that Chinese exports are going to be more or less walled off from the developed world. And they don't know how to think about that. I know how they should think about it. They should rejoin the law-abiding community of nations, be respectful of their trading partners, and be trustworthy partners, and not hold people hostage. I think the Chinese rare earth position is very similar to what the Democrats are doing in the Senate by keeping the government shut down.
Can you give us an update on the flip side of that relationship, soybean and other agriculture exports? Is assistance coming for U.S. farmers who are kind of caught up in this?
We've spent an enormous amount of time studying what we should do best for farmers. And at the senior level, the essential employees that are still working but not getting paid are working very hard on a plan. And I expect that when the government opens, that very soon after you're going to see what President Trump's plan for farmers is. But it's really quite clever and generous. I can say that.
Finally, so you served at a high level in the previous Trump term. Now this time, what are the biggest differences in how this administration is working compared to?
I didn't expect that I would be back. I kind of used to joke to my friends that I was Trump season 1, and in Trump season 2, I'll probably be the Christmas special or something. And then here I am in the season. I think that what President Trump has done, when I look at the team that we've built, he's built a team of people that are a mix of new, talented people and older, people that were here for the last administration, like me and Stephen Miller, that sort of understand a little bit about how to make a White House function well. Incredibly astute leadership from Susie Wiles, and with a few exceptions, like really strong collegiality. We were talking behind stage that, and it wasn't meant to be a criticism of this great organization, that I can remember in the first Trump administration, a lot of times I found out what was going on from Axios, even though I was in the White House. And that was because everybody who ever had a disagreement with anyone else would then call every journalist in town and say that other guy is totally a jerk or something, and it'd be a great story. But this time, like for example, this White House is disciplined. It's extremely disciplined, and when we have disagreements, then they stay in-house.
For the record, if you want to wage your internal battles through us, we're happy to talk.
Give it